I have had a growing problem in the corner of this workshop ever since I finished this shop and moved in. It's been the corner where I wanted to put my main workbench, but I couldn't because all I had was the metal legs to that workbench. I don't have a top to it. See, it's one of those metal workbenches where you buy the bottom half and it's a steel, you know, it's out of steel and all that. And then you buy the top half of it, whether it's a steel top or butcher block or whatever. Well, I just bought the steel legs. I didn't buy the top. The first time around, I made the top out of 3/4 inch plywood, just a utility grade plywood. And then I added some stiffeners, some poplar stiffeners along the bottom to kind of give it some support. Well, frankly, that didn't work. So I ended up throwing the top away when we moved. So now I need to make another bench top. And I don't want to make it out of maple, a butcher block top. It would be the strongest top. However, I don't want to spend the money on the butcher block, and I don't really want to spend the time gluing it all up and finishing it. So the solution that I found was called a torsion box, and that's what this video is about. It's about how to make a torsion box tabletop. So what is a torsion box? A torsion box is basically a sandwich of an internal support structure. This is looking down on the bench top. So an internal support structure that makes a series of boxes. And then looking from the sideways up here, you have your 1/2 inch plywood top and then your 1/4 inch plywood top that's laminated and glued to that. So what you have basically is a 2-dimensional I-beam, whereas a regular I-beam is a 1-dimensional I-beam. This kind of acts as a 2-dimensional I-beam, acting in both ways to keep things from sagging. This bottom piece of plywood, the piece of plywood that I didn't add the first time around, is actually very, very important, as if this top starts to sag, the top stretches along the bottom. And this little piece of 1/4 inch is very important. Even though it's 1/4 inch, it keeps that bottom from stretching. And if it sags, it'll stretch along the bottom. So that's what this is for. It keeps it from sagging and stretching, and thus stiffening the whole top up considerably. The internal torsion box itself, I made just out of scrap 2x4s. It was 2x4s and probably a 2x6 that I had left over from my construction. So the internal supports of this don't have to be the best wood. They just have to be somewhat straight. And if you can straighten them out with a joiner or a planer like I did, it should be fine. So I ripped them to size, and then I ran them through my planer to make sure that they were very consistent widths. And then I went on to cutting them to length. So I went to my miter box and I cut everything to consistent lengths. Once I did that, I laid it out on my workbench top and made sure that I got the spacing correct. Now, you may notice that the 2 rows of cross members, the shortest ones, are kind of staggered. Well, they're staggered for a reason, and that's so I could shoot a finish nail in the end of each side and not have to shoot it in at an angle. If they were lined up, I'd have to shoot it in at an angle, and I didn't want to do that. So I glued everything up, I pinned it together with finish nails, and then I clamped it up in my clamp setup. Now, I used parallel clamps for a majority of it, and the parallel clamps were just a little bit too big for my bench top that I was working on. So what I did to make sure that I didn't have a twist in the tabletop is that I ran a level across two ends of the workbench top and made sure that the bubble fell within the same portion of the two black lines. If I get it in the same portion of those lines on either side, then I know that there's no real twist in the glue up, and so I let it glue up. Next, I cut to size some utility plywood. The utility plywood that I used was a 1/2 inch plywood for the top and then a 1/4 inch plywood for the bottom. And once I got that cut up to size, I sandwiched the torsion box in between the two pieces of plywood. I glued the bottom one on first, and then I glued the top one and clamped it all up as best I could. I ran glue along all edges of the torsion box where it hit the plywood. So when it's all dried and glued together, it's one solid unified piece, all laminated together. And then I set some weights on it to make sure that the center was glued on, and then I let it dry. After I let it dry, I needed to run an edge band around the edge of it. I made the edge band out of poplar. So I ran the poplar through the table saw and the planer to get it to consistent size, and then I mitered it all around the edges. So I made a good hardwood edge around the edge of the bench top to dress it up and to give it just a little bit more strength. So once I got the edge band on, I filled in all the holes and all the gaps that I needed to with an epoxy filler. Once I got that filler cured, I rounded over the edges of everything, and then I sanded the whole top smooth up to 220 grit sandpaper with the random orbit. So once everything was smooth, I vacuumed off the top, blew off the rest of the dust, and I applied 3 coats of polyurethane to the top, oil-based polyurethane. I like the oil base better than the water base, as I feel like it's just a more durable finish, and I want as durable as a finish as I can for a workbench top like what I have. So once I got the top finished, I mounted it to the metal legs, and I was ready to go, and this is what I got. And so here's the finished product. Makes for a pretty good bench top, and I'm very pleased how it turned out, and rather surprised actually, because I didn't know if I was going to make it strong enough or what have you. But a long time ago, I used to work for a cabinet making company, and my supervisor was named Dave. And when we put cabinets on the wall, Dave would come up and give it what's called the Dave test. Well, the Dave test is, he was a pretty large guy, and he would put all of his weight on the cabinet to see if it would budge. So I'm going to give this tabletop, bench top, the Dave test. And it works. It works really, really good. So if you want a good, inexpensive alternative to a solid maple bench top, this is the way to go. The torsion box is the way to go. If you like this video, please like or subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.